Hey, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jason, and here I talk about all things story. And it is that time of the week. It is Fiction Friday day. It is time for another short story of my series, and we have hit episode 79. And if you are new here, this is where I write a short story of exactly 1,000 words inspired by a piece of artwork without an outline and then deconstruct it a little bit. So if you are into books, and presumably you are if you are watching this right now, there's been some recent announcement with Cormac McCarthy argued as the greatest living American writer. And I would have to say I probably agree with that. I've read a few of his books and have really enjoyed them, even though they can be difficult to read at times. But what's interesting here is he has a pair of novels coming out in the fall, winter, I believe. The Passenger and Stella Maris, and they're somewhat interconnected, and so I'm really looking forward to those. I'll probably read those back to back, obviously, and do a review here. But there is a limited edition box set, so if you are one of those people who enjoy collecting things that cost too much money, I highly suggest you check that one out. And so, needless to say, this story was inspired by Cormac McCarthy's work. I'm not going to pretend that I am on his level, not even close to his level, but seeing this artwork and me just kind of thinking more about Cormac McCarthy with the news, I thought I would give it a shot. And so I needed some music, like every week. No Country for Old Men does not have a soundtrack. The Road soundtrack I have already listened to for another story. I should have done The Counselor in hindsight, but the one that I listened to was the soundtrack for the TV show Fargo by Jeff Russo. Can't say it was a perfect fit. I think there were some good tracks on there, but still, the story happened. So let us move on and check out this week's artwork. This week's artwork is titled Before Sunrise, and it's by David Boquian Carrasco, who is a concept artist at Industrial Light and Magic from Vancouver, Canada. I actually did one of David's pieces a while back titled Sister because it completely grabbed my attention from its cinematic quality, and I didn't even realize this was by him, just scrolling down the feed, and of course I was drawn to it. He is a master at creating cinematic storytelling in a single image. However, because this one is so simple, it really drew me in even more. We just have two men standing on a beach. Sunrise is coming, apparently, according to the title. One man, hooded man, in the foreground with his back to us is holding a gun. So I think one thing it seems to be like a lot of artists don't understand is how to capture this kind of conflict in an image, or storytelling even in an image. Now, I know a lot of artists are trying to create concepts and not necessarily stories, but I feel like you should be doing both regardless. I think it's a great thing to have a story within the image, but I am clearly biased because I am writing stories prompted by these images. I look forward to seeing where the story takes me. So David, thank you again for continually making amazing artwork that inspires me. So that said, let's see what I came up with. The two men drove long into the night because the dawn was their destination. Almost there, Holden said, who drove. Where? Tom said, who rode beside him. Where we need to be. We don't have to be anywhere. I like driving at night. Night's almost gone. See that? Holden pointed at the windshield. Tom looked at it, but just saw Holden's finger, with his long sleeve pulled to his knuckles. He stretched it all the time to hide the scales on his skin, like he was stretching his other sleeve now. Holden thought he was hiding it between his seat and the door, but Tom saw. All I see is a window you forgot to wash, Tom said. The glass was smudged with circular marks that looked like the radial metal patterns Holden had been working on at the shop when Tom had first met him. The light had struck the metal in a way Tom had never seen light strike before. Holden struck him that day. It was your turn, Holden said. It was my turn to fill up the tank, Tom said. Doesn't change the fact that dawn's coming. I still don't see it. Look at the time, it's only 2:30. The clock was analog and did read 2:30, with a minute hand that wobbled from the road. It couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to go to the past or the future by a minute. It always says 2:30, Holden said. Maybe the clock was broken, but Tom didn't feel like arguing. Can I roll down the window at least? Tom said. I'm cold already, Holden said. He wore a puffy vest that glimmered when the headlights reflected off the reflectors on the side of the road. Beneath that, he wore a hooded sweatshirt. The hood was pulled over his head. Tom moved closer to him. Feels all right to me, he said. There's a draft in the door. I can't feel anything. I told you. It's here, at the door. You can have my jacket. I don't want your jacket. Okay. Holden turned on the high beams, and it hit the fog and painted it bright and gray and solid. Tom found he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, so he moved back on his side against the door and clasped it on. You're going to get us killed, he said. I can't see anything out there. You don't have to, Holden said. I'm serious. You know what I mean. It will be all for nothing. Holden hit the brakes and the car skidded to a stop. A French fry cardboard slid off the dash and fell on the gear shift and swung there. They'd bought it and shared what used to be inside at a burger joint 10 miles or so back at a town of 50 people called Two Shores, where they'd killed the girl. You don't know what it was for, Holden said. He hit the French fry cardboard off the gear shift and smashed it with his heel. Hell I do. I was the one who did it. Holden thought about that, squeezing the steering wheel like he was wringing clothes dry. He didn't notice his sleeves fall back to show his scaly skin. Tom touched his hand, where the scales were. Holden threw Tom's hand off the wheel and grabbed him by the collar of his denim jacket. Don't you ever touch me. Tom looked at Holden in his eyes that were like gems, and he wished he knew something about gems so he could give them a name. He put both his hands over Holden's. Holden's gem eyes closed, and he fell into Tom with his forehead pressed to his chest, and he wept. Tom went to put his hand on the back of Holden's head to pull him closer. But Holden moved back into his seat and then opened his door and got out. Tom sat in the car until the dome light went off, and then he sat there longer. Holden was a shadow outside that was darker than the night, which had become blue. It reminded Tom of the color of Holden's eyes, and he wanted to see them, so he got out too. One of the two shores that had left the town of Two Shores behind crashed and roared beneath the solid sky. Holden paced on the beach, pulling in his sleeves. Tom followed Holden's footprints, like he'd seen done in a movie before, as though it looked like there was only one man. Tom passed Holden to get a better look at the water, and there was evidence of two men. What are we doing here? Tom said. Holden still looked like a shadow ghost. Something that wasn't his hand extended from his sleeve. Stopping for good. I don't understand. I think you do. Holden held the gun so Tom could see it. All we've been through, and you want it to go down this way? I do. I don't believe you. Holden pointed the gun at Tom. Do you believe this? I believe that killed a woman who would have ruined our lives. That's not all it's done, or about to do. Tom looked at the ocean and then looked at Holden again. He saw his eyes now and suddenly knew what a blue gem was called. I'm sorry I did what I did that got us into this. Holden saw gems in Tom's eyes then. It was both of us. It was. But it can't go on. Why not? It just can't. I'm sorry. Holden aimed the gun at Tom and pulled the trigger. It clicked. It clicked again. I thought you were different, but I suppose I always knew. Tom reached in his pocket and pulled out the rounds he had removed from the gun after killing the girl and threw them into the ocean. Holden watched Tom in the half-light of dawn, and Tom watched Holden. Welcome to the end, dear viewer. I'm so glad you made it. This is where I talk about my final thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like, and just kind of deconstruct this whole thing. So with that said, let us get into the writing itself. And as you know, this was heavily inspired by Cormac McCarthy, more than a few ways, not only in the simplicity of the prose, but in fact, I named two characters after them. So Holden, Judge Holden, is the antagonist, I guess you could say, in Blood Meridian. And Tom is the sheriff in No Country for Old Men. And so it's always fun trying to figure out names for characters in these short stories. And I thought, well, why not, if it's inspired by Cormac McCarthy, why not choose a couple of character names from his stuff? So that's where that came from. And I will confess, the last book of his I did read was Blood Meridian, and I didn't really look at anything in depth a while before I wrote this. So if you are a Cormac McCarthy aficionado, you are more than welcome to let me in the comments know how wrong I am in all of this. But anyway, let's talk about the story. So one thing I really noticed about Cormac McCarthy's writing style is just the simple dialogue. And so we begin an exchange between Holden and Tom here, where he's saying, almost there, where we need to be. I feel like that's a very Cormac McCarthy piece of dialogue, just kind of shutting down the conversation in a way. But I have these two guys driving in a car somewhere, and because the title of the artwork and the story is called Before Sunrise, we know they are marching toward dawn or driving toward dawn, because that is their destination by the first line. And I'm not sure where this the psoriasis thing came from. It just popped into my head. But later on in the story, as you know, it kind of becomes a moment of subtext for these two characters. And I'm not sure if you clued into what I was getting at between these two characters, but I will get into that a little bit more later. So they begin getting in a petty argument about washing this windshield, because Tom can't see through it because it's so smudged. And not only are they arguing about that, there's this little aside of a clock that's reading 2:30, presumably AM if they're driving in the middle of the night. I've noticed a lot of things like this in stories, particularly Cormac McCarthy stories, where there's objects that he describes where they're seemingly ordinary, but there's some significance behind them. And really, I could have probably pushed this a lot farther, but the only significance that came out of it was it couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to go to the past or the future by a minute, because it's sitting there wobbling back and forth with the turbulence of the car. And so as we learn more about these two characters, you do kind of see that there are, in fact, two mistakes that or two things that they did or have affected them that are going to make their life a tough going. And so next we get into a little bit more subtext. Tom, he wants to roll down the window. Holden says he's cold already. He even offers his jacket. There's a draft in the door. I think you hopefully by now know where I'm going with this. Not that I tried to make it obvious. I think that was one of the challenges with this, is that I wanted all of this to be done in subtext. I didn't want anything vocalized between these two characters or described in any such way. And that's another thing I should talk about. This was written in the omniscient voice. I never really write in this voice because I prefer third person limited, but something about that voice and that POV in Cormac McCarthy's style just really felt right. And so it wasn't too bad. I mean, this writing session was only like 6 minutes over an hour, I believe. So even though I was attempting to emulate another writer's style and then construct a story at the same time, wasn't too restricting, which is kind of funny about the whole thing. I thought it would be really difficult. And so Holden, he begins to drive erratically, and then that has us hear Tom say, "You're going to get us killed. I don't have to." And then here is where the first moment happens. It will all be for nothing if they were to die. And you're wondering, well, what is this thing? And then that angers Holden, and he skids the car to a stop. And another strange thing that popped in my head where, I imagine them, they probably don't have a lot of money. They seem to be on the run, and they bought it and shared what used to be inside at a burger joint 10 miles or so back, this French fry cardboard box that fell off the dash when he slammed onto the brakes, from a town of 50 people called Two Shores, where they'd killed the girl. And I've noticed that too in Cormac McCarthy, where he will seemingly like just be very nonchalant about dropping a bomb in the text. And so that's what I did. Really, they slam on the brakes because this is what they're talking about, that they killed the girl. And there's just some trash on the dashboard, and it falls off. And then that is where, when I'm describing where it came from, that's when I talk about they killed the girl, and not in its own separate sentence, just part of this long run-on sentence. That's another thing I've seen a lot in Cormac McCarthy stuff, just and this and that and that. And you'll see more of that as we get a little bit further. And here we see Tom was the one who killed the girl, and Tom reaches out to try to comfort his friend, but he touches the psoriasis there. One thing I remember reading about Cormac McCarthy's writing is how the omniscient voice allows him to say things that might be very poetic without feeling like they need to be coming from the character, because that's a failing that I see a lot of times when you're first starting out writing, is you describe things in such a way from a POV character who would not see things in such a way. And so you constantly have to remind yourself to write from the perspective of the character who you're writing from, obviously, and make sure that they would describe things in such a way based on what they know and who they are. And so here I talk about Tom looked at Holden and his eyes were like gems, and he wished he knew something about gems so he could give them a name. And then he put both of his hands over Holden's hands. And that really kind of made Holden snap, because he just kind of falls into Tom and begins to cry. Then right when, Tom pulls him down, he gets out of the car, and here's sort of a Cormac McCarthy style line, what I'm talking about. Tom went to put his hand on the back of Holden's head to pull him closer, but Holden moved back into his seat and then opened his door and got out. So rather than, making this a smooth or shortened transition, I mean, it's typically reported beat by beat in that way. And here was another sort of omniscient author weaving things. Tom sat in the car until the dome light went off, and then he sat there longer. An interesting way to kind of extend that stay there. And then finally they're on the beach, and the color of the sky reminds Holden of it, so he gets out there. And this here, if you didn't pick it up, was kind of a Shining reference when Danny is running away from his father in the snow maze, in the hedge maze. That is what I did. So Tom followed Holden's footprints like he's seen done in a movie before, so it looked like there was only one man. Then in the very next section, Tom passed Holden to get a better look at the water, and there was evidence of two men. So I think there could be some, arguably some subtext there. But we shall continue forward. And here's the final confrontation where they're looking at each other. We reveal what we see in the artwork. We see Holden having this gun in his hand, and he's threatening to shoot him. And then, really what he does is he admits to what's happening, and this is doing double duty. Tom says, "I'm sorry I did what I did that got us into this." And then Holden, this is a signifier too, Holden saw gems in Tom's eyes, meaning, that's when the character is turning. He's coming to a realization, just as Tom did. He's seeing the true feelings for this man. I think you know what I'm getting at. But then he agrees it was both of us. It was, but it can't go on. And so Holden, he aims it immediately and then pulls the trigger. But what happens is Tom, unfortunately, was a bit of a prophet. He could read Holden ahead of time and knew he was a dangerous guy. And so he had removed the rounds from the gun after he killed the girl. This last line, I'm not sure how I feel about it. I like that it's open-ended, and there's some, again, more subtext in this. And normally I don't end stuff like this, but I really sat there for a little bit back and forth thinking about it. Should I change it? But I just kind of liked it. I wanted to let it breathe. So Holden watched Tom in the half light of dawn, and Tom watched Holden. There's that just frozen frame right there at the very end, and we just leave the story hanging. And so essentially these two guys were in love with each other, and there was a woman that knew about them, and that is the line when it says, she was going to ruin our lives. Rather than leaving town or doing something else, they ended up killing her and having to leave town anyway. And then Holden he can't deal with it anymore, and so he thinks he just has to kill Tom because, their relationship is forbidden, essentially. I had a great time with this one. If you have read Cormac McCarthy, let me know your thoughts. And I know, I'm not achieving his skill as a writer, but let me know if I at least kind of captured the tone of him, because that was really my goal. Obviously, the writing style as well, to the best of my ability. But I think this was the first time I truly have ever tried to write in the style of another writer, and it was fun. It's something about it helps you obviously step away from yourself, and so you look at the words you're writing quite a bit differently. But I still do feel a sense of ownership over this, because even though I was trying to mimic another writer, some of my stuff is always going to be in there. There's no way I'm going to write exactly like he would write. But anyway, I hoped you enjoyed this story. Let me know in the comments if you did, or give me a like if you liked the video. Come hang out on our Discord. We have a great read-along going on with John Langan's The Wide Carnivorous Sky and Other Monstrous Geographies. And part 4 of that read-along is going to be coming out, I think, this Saturday. I finished the story, so I just need to record the video. As always, keep reading, keep writing, and I will see you next week. Thanks. Bye. If you'd like to read the story in its non-video format, check the link in the description. I didn't edit anything else, promise. Thanks again.